I'm going to talk about planning for abundance, and then I'm going to talk a little about planning for disaster if I get there. I'm just thinking about abundance, and the first thing, this is about vegetable gardening mostly, and so I try to think about, well, what do I like to eat? And that's the first decision point of what I grow. And then I start thinking about, well, how much do I want to grow of each? And then how much space do I have that I can grow that in? If you have a small amount of space, then it's one decision point. You may want to grow one kale plant if it's enough for a person, or one or two Swiss chard. If you have a lot of space, you may want to grow for more. And it depends whether you're going for yourself, for family and friends, for a food pantry, for a market. So we try to grow as much as we can, because our goal is to give a lot away. We looked at all the possible vegetables we can grow within the season. We choose the ones we can grow. A lot of that has to do with which are the most productive. Where a cauliflower plant that takes 16 inches by 16 inches, you get one head of cauliflower. Whereas a kale plant that takes maybe 14 by 14 inches or something like that, you can just harvest the outside leaves for months at a time, and it just keeps growing. So it's a lot more productive. So if you can grow those kind of plants that are more productive, the leafy kind that you can just harvest the outside leaves and they just keep growing and growing, then that's something we look at. And we also look at, can we grow things that within one season we can grow multiple times? Like radishes, we can plant 3 times, plant, we harvest them, plant again, harvest and plant again, because they don't take long. And the same for turnip variety that we grow. It doesn't take, so that's another thing. Choosing the varieties. You might like a carrot plant that takes 110 days, but there are lots of really good ones that take 55 days. And you can get 2 crops in the same space. That kind of thinking and planning, determining which varieties work best that way. Maybe you think, oh, well, I'm going to grow a broccoli plant and I'm going to get a great big head of broccoli. But think about, well, can I grow a broccoli plant variety that gets lots of side shoots? So I get a head, it's not the biggest ever, but I get a head of broccoli. And then I get a lot of side shoots for months. And so it's much, much more productive. So just thinking about the variety we grow is really important. And then we think about, what can we grow on a trellis? Because that's vertical space. We could grow, if we wanted to grow cantaloupe, we can grow it on a trellis vertically and use the rest of the bed. It can be grown on the trellis on the edge of the bed, and the rest of the bed could be used for growing something else in the squash family. So when you think about that, there's lots of plants that can grow on trellises that don't take up a lot of horizontal space in the garden. And then there are some choices, like if you're growing tomatoes, we grow a lot of tomatoes. The most productive tomatoes are cherry tomatoes, and some cherry tomatoes are much more productive than other cherry tomatoes. So choosing the right variety there can get you a huge amount more production. The same thing with other things like pepper plants. You can have a pepper plant that can produce a little bit in the spring and a little bit in the fall if you still have the space, or you can grow a variety that can produce all summer long. So these kind of decisions on variety are really important. One of the things that we've encountered this growing season in the fall is that we have way, way, way more greens than we can deal with. And that's because we have almost every type of green you can grow, mustards and kales and collards. So the question in my mind is, should I even grow kale and collards anymore and mustards? Because I can grow kohlrabi and radishes and beets and use the tops of those as well for greens. So that's a way to think about maybe making choices if you have a small garden space. And then I don't want anybody to forget about that, we have several growing seasons. In summer, a lot of people want to give up in the summer because it's so hot. And I say, don't give up in the summer, because there's lots of really wonderful crops to grow that can grow after the spring crops. And that's like okra and roselle and eggplant, southern peas, sweet potatoes, ivy leaf gourd, cucumbers, even edamame. So what I wanted to show you is that we have a spreadsheet that goes back to 2004, and we make a decision. This has to do with rotation. So we try not to grow the same family in the same space for at least 3 years. And the way we do that, we have a spreadsheet that goes back for every spring and fall planting season. And these are our beds here that I'm pointing to. And in the fall, in bed 2, we said, well, we could grow lettuce and legume and carrots. Those are the choices. And we made those figured out what we can grow here that hasn't been grown in this space in at least 3 years. And then we can go through the whole thing, all of our beds, and make decisions on what we're going to grow where. A lot of that has to do with what is planted before it and the season before and what will be finished at the right time to plant these plants. And that's what we're doing in the spring here. What's in red is what we're actually deciding to grow in these beds. I think Bob will show you something that will say, this is when you can start planting, and this is when this crop will finish. And that gives you another perspective on how to make decisions on what follows what. I don't want to touch on planning for disaster because we just had a disaster. But there are all kinds of disasters. There's freezes, there's loss of water, insect predation, inability to take care of our garden. We go on vacation, not this year, not with COVID, but we go on vacation sometimes for a month or 6 weeks. So who takes care of the garden? Backup. In permaculture, it's all about backup. And so we have 5 people who we know like to help us in the garden and are eager to help us. So we can split up the work between those people. Even if you don't take long vacations, you at least have some people lined up in case you can't take care of your stuff for whatever reason, like a broken leg or something. There may be a freezer, so planning for disaster would be have row covers and walls of water ready, have blankets ready, things like that. If there's a loss of the season's crop, we're in pretty good shape because since we grow so much, we grow a lot of stuff to preserve. So we water bath can pickles and squash and green beans and long beans and salsa. And we dehydrate tomatoes and peppers and herbs and figs and jujubes. And we freeze different fruits and kale.
Persimmons, figs.
And kale and collard and chard and green beans and squash. We freeze all the edamames and cream peas. So, and then we ferment sauerkraut for a whole year. We've already done that for this year. So even if we have a big failure and we don't, of loss of crops, we have a lot stored for that. And then we grow things that can keep a long time, like winter squash that can keep for 6 months, beets, carrots, onions, all the root crops, potatoes, kohlrabi, radishes, they can just stay for months and months in the refrigerator.
Parsnips and rutabaga as well.
So it's just about the planning for disaster, I think, is about backups and having those things ready. What tools, what supplies do we need to handle this kind of stuff? We experiment. We grow lots of varieties of things. Last year, we grew 23 tomato varieties. We evaluated those. We grew 11 of those this year because those were the best. And so we keep track of that. So we have I'll call a seed list spreadsheet that tracks all of this, all the best varieties that we've experienced growing.
Yeah, I think that would be a wonderful thing if you're willing to share that resource. I think a lot of people would be interested in that. And I know that different people's gardens are different, but I always ask everybody, so what is your favorite cherry tomato? What is your favorite? Because I get different recommendations to try.
So this is a spreadsheet. You can see just some varieties here, all the things that we've grown or grow. And these are the varieties that, whatever we try, and we try new things, we put it on this sheet. The numbers is how many seeds we have left of it. But these are the varieties we think are the best for us in our situation where we are. The most productive, the least disease, and the size that we want. And so we just keep track of it this way so we can easily look at what we want to grow and what we have on hand.
Basically, I do some of this in growing organic vegetables. So I'm going to be a mix of what it is. I think you can use generally, plus how I use this myself, basically, but we're one example. And the basic thing is that what plants do depends on temperature. And temperatures this last week in our yard bottomed out at 15 degrees. In Conroe, it bottomed out at 1. And in Galveston Island, it bottomed out at 21. So there's a huge difference between 21 and 15 and 1. And Dallas had the negative temperatures for the first time since the 1890s. And so this is a very unusual cold event, but these zones have to do with planting times. It just changes what zones you're in and therefore what vegetables to plant. But if you're trying to plan for a year-round situation, you need to get your timing right for when you plant where you are. And I mean, Shelley lives around North Loop, as I remember, and North Loop is closer to Intercontinental in terms of their zones than they are to Hobby, which is where my zone is. So we actually don't have quite the same planting schedule. It's pretty close though, it's not that different. But my point basically is that you have to get this right if you want to have abundance. This is a kind of master planting list for different fall vegetables, A through C, and it goes into February. And these are based on typical temperatures for that thing, which is not this last week. This last week was coldest, at least, it's the coldest February day since 1951 in central Houston. So you don't plan on something like that, but I'm just pointing out, though, that this is what you do plan on. And you can see that when you plant, say, garden arugula could do that, it's going to change based on time. Like you wouldn't want to plant that in Cold Spring or somewhere like that in November, because it's just going to not grow and it may die. Second thing to say is you need to plan for a year ahead. And if you don't like planning because plans have not worked out when people have imposed plans on you, you won't get as much as if you do plan. That's what Ray was showing and Gary. And the planning is really important because when you decide to plant something like tomatoes, like Nancy was planting our tomato transplants today, you're also planning to have that occupied through about June. So you're also planning not to use that space for anything else, is what I'm saying. So if you want to plant something in May, it isn't going to be where the tomatoes are. Another thing to say is that if you're over 100 square feet, which is 5 by 20 feet, you really need to do a rotation plan. And so that's a key question. And where are you going to put stuff and when is it going to come out? And when is it going to harvest? All that sort of stuff. Now, this is a very simple kind of diagram I did years ago for a newspaper article of basically what a rotation might look like. And it's got the months in there. And you could do something like this fairly easily. You don't need a whole lot of knowledge to do that. But I'm just saying that's one example. This is a more general sort of answer. This one at the top there is closer to what Nancy and I do. And the one down at the bottom is a 4-bed rotation. And if you were a farmer, this could be 4 different fields. So, I mean, there's nothing that says it's got to be small. It could be big. So question is, how much space do you have? And that's a question of calculating this out with fairly simple geometry. And I'm not going to get into calculating this stuff, but it would be useful to know how many square feet you have. And this is just some examples of how you calculate this. And I can make this file available on the Mighty Network. I would recommend equal sized beds. It makes rotation much easier if they're the same number of square feet. And it'd be useful to have names other than just simply numbers. But if you like numbers, you could say the number 3 bed, but you could also name it in some way or another, which is, I think we did. Yeah, we did that in the top diagram there. This is based on certain obvious feature of that. So you set up a rotation diagram, and then the question of how do you group things? And I would say one of the big things to do is put plants that will harvest together in one place if possible. So all the tomatoes in one place, if that'll work, because then they come out, you've got a space to plant something else. Where if you really had a lot of trouble with tomatoes growing, then you could put them all over the place and you'd have little pieces come out at the same time, but they're really spread out. So anyway, I like that. And then moving them season to season or year to year gets rid of crawling pest insects and plant-specific diseases in many of them. Some of them will fly to the next bed or something, but most of them don't. And it balances nutrients and so on. But the key thing about this too is this: you need to figure out what are your high priority crops. That's a big deal. The high priority crops are the things that you need a lot of space for. So I'll just show you some examples. So figure out your top priorities of things you want, and that relates to what you know you can grow also. You might want something, but that doesn't mean you can grow it. But things that you can grow that you really like, that take up a lot of space, that's the key question you have to answer. This is an example of something you can do when the thing finishes. Notice the left-hand column: large amounts, medium amounts, small amounts. And small amounts you can just fit in. And that has to do with our space and what we like. And if you were doing market gardening or something, it would make a whole big difference, because what will sell is a totally different question, and what you can produce, and what Ray was saying about some things are more productive than others. This is a square foot analysis of how many square feet and what months they need to be in the ground. So like we do 55 square feet of cream peas, or at least that's the plan there. And this is another example of this sort of thing where you can plan this out by beds. And this is one last thing I wanted to mention here about fruits. Fruits are the same kind of thing, except they last for years, hopefully. And this is how much space they mainly take up in feet diameter and when they harvest. So that's just another example. That's in my book, and a lot of this other stuff is in my book, but not that way. So I didn't get to disaster particularly, except that temperatures are the key thing, and too hot or too cold is going to kill things. And as Ray said, there's a lot of ways to protect. So, but that's another topic. Thank you.
There's just so much. We could have a full weekend class on this stuff from both of you and still not be done talking and asking questions. So I know this is a teaser. This is sort of for me, this is a reminder of what to center on, what to focus on out of all the things I am interested in, what to focus on. And I appreciate that.